Hey guys, welcome back to another video. How's everyone doing here? I hope everyone's doing awesome today here. So in today's video, we're gonna be covering over part 2 again of the histories of the greatest philosophers. So if you guys have not seen my last video here, we covered this video through the philosophers such as Socrates all the way to Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz's philosophies here. In today's video, we're going to be covering over 18th century 18th to 19th century philosophers to David Hume, and I'm going to be probably stopping right here all the way to Friedrich Nietzsche. So, yeah, and so how this is going to go to is that I'm going to read also to the text here of all the different philosophers, like many of their philosophical ideas, as well as also thoughts, as well as and like also through all the different kinds of philosophy, such as the philosophy of mind, philosophy of religion, philosophy of perception, the philosophy of the mind, as well as also political philosophy, ethics, meta-ethics here, and metaphysics, and so much more here. So yeah, so that's what we're going to be covering over in this video. So yeah, but before we get into this video, if you guys have not yet, please be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to my channel if you're new. Don't forget to comment and turn on my bell notifications. That way you get notified by every video that I'll be posting in the channel. And yeah, I'll be trying to we're trying to basically getting over to 50 subscribers to the second channel, and if you guys do that, that would be awesome here. So yeah, anyways, let's get to it. Alrighty, hey, let's do this. So let's go to slideshow, and yeah, okay, so I'm gonna be reading through this here all over again. So, and of course we're gonna be starting off with David Hume here, the 18th century Scottish philosopher here. So if you guys have not to know here, I've also covered him, and as well as also the other philosopher Adam Smith, also in the history of the Edinburgh video here. So if you guys not have watched that video yet here, I recommend do so here, watch it here, or I'll put a link in the description down below in this video. But yeah, so let's go over it through here, and then I'll give my thoughts and everything interesting and whatnot here about each of these philosophers, like some of it, I guess. So yeah, so David Hume was an 18th century Scottish philosopher, historian, and economist known for his influential system of empiricism, as well as skepticism and naturalism. He argued that all the knowledge derives from experience, which he gained through impressions, which are like sensations and impassions, and ideas, the fake copies of impressions. A major contribution of his skeptical critique of causality and arguing that the habit of the mind based on observed constant conjunction rather than a necessary connection, and his ethical theory that morality is grounded in sentiment or feeling rather than reason here. So basically he kind of basically says that humans are basically more influenced by our more feelings rather than just reason and knowledge here. And basically Hume believes that also that if we could basically get to be humans to have a better and a normal life here. So let's go over empiricism and knowledge. Hume believed that all ideas are derived from sensory experience. He stated that every simple idea is a copy of a simple impression, a principle called the copy principle. He followed to John Locke, rejecting the innate ideas here, arguing that the mind is like a blank state at birth, upon with the experience of imprints and knowledge. Even though that John Locke as well as David Hume, both of them who share them in common, they both share the empiricism ideas here, that being that basically people are driven into more human emotion and more human feelings here. And then we have his skepticism. Hume's skepticism targets our knowledge of things that we haven't directly observed. So basically, skepticism, if you guys don't know what that means, it basically means that all our human knowledge, or basically inductive reason, basically comes from many questions here. So we cannot be certain, or we don't know, or we question everything here, and hopefully that humans, I don't know, humans don't suddenly turn the frogs or something. And also that he questions certainty that there are beliefs about causality, induction, and the existence of the self as a conscious entity, arguing that we have no evidence of the mind's enduring through the time for the matters. His skepticism was a direct challenge to rationalism, as famously awakened Immanuel Kant from his dogmatic slumber. And in fact, also that Immanuel Kant, who the philosopher I think I might get to later here, he also was like basically influenced of empiricism, as well as also made their other ideas as well from David Hume here, which is why that Kant had then later wrote his book here known as The Critique of Pure Reason in 1781. And so let's go over also the Hume has also argued that you see the other event followed from another, that we don't observe necessary connection, but simply the constant conjunction that leads us to the habit of expecting the second event after the first. And let's go over his ethics and morality. So Hume contended that morality is based off of feeling or sentiment, like I mentioned, not reason, famously stating that reason is the slave of the passions. He also argued that moral judgments or liking or disliking on action arise from emotional responses, which are influenced by our capacity or for sympathy. Like feeling what others like basically feels is basically what he's trying to argue with. And also his like moral theory of as a precursor to utilitarianism, which I think I mentioned is the founders are known as Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill here, which basically means doing the greatest good for the greatest number here. And so the grounds of morality and the utility and pleasing the consequences of actions. And also let's go through the philosophy of religion, that Hume offered a secular moral theory challenging the arguments of the existence of God here and suggesting that religious beliefs are rooted in human psychology and sentiment rather than the rational truth here. So he basically also doesn't believe in any sort of God here, or basically and doesn't give me any ideas here. And also that Hume was also basically the skeptic here, and also came up with also with the common sense questions and ideas. One of them, most notably, was the personal identity here that he also covered here. And he also basically debates how humans and discuss. This is his main theories of the result they read is also driving through more about human experience and basically more about through the aspects of human nature. And then finally, also for David Hume here, we have his famous is-ought problem, which is a philosophical argument famously articulated by David Hume, which states that one cannot logically derive from a statement without an ought, what ought to be from a statement about what is. So the problem highlights the logical gap between the descriptive statements and the fact that the perspective of moral statements, arguing that they cannot be jumped into from an is to an ought without the bridge or hidden moral premise. For example, just because something is certain a way in nature does not mean it should be that way morally. So basically, his is ought problem basically highlights how can we moral actions based off what is and what ought to be here. And basically, David Hume had argued that there is a gap between our reason. There is a gap between moral knowledge and natural facts here, or facts and values here. And many people had been trying to basically many philosophers as well tried to bridge this is odd gap problem here, but it's basically impossible here, and it completely relies on moral actions there, and also the utilitarian principle, and we must completely rely on that kind of issues here and through our daily lives here. Alright, so let's go. And I've also added also videos here about David Hume, the School of Life, skepticism, and the is-ought problem. If you guys want me to see me react to these videos here, I'll probably maybe do that in actually in just all these in a future video. So yeah, let's keep moving forward. Alright. Alongside with David Hume here, we have Adam Smith here, the philosopher and the economist here. So he was best known as like the father of the economics for his book, The Wealth of Nations, which was published back in 1776. He is considered the key figure of the Scottish Enlightenment and is famous of his ideas on free markets, self-interest, and the division of labor. He is often associated with the modern capitalism, who he also wrote about the ethics in his earlier work, the theory of moral sentiments. And also, let's see. So let's go with his origin of Adam Smith. So he was born in Kinkinley in Scotland in 1723. He studied at Glasgow and Oxford universities here, and the Wealth of Nations. And he also published a book called The Wealth of Nations in 1776, and his work is considered the foundation of modern economics. It introduced the concept of the division of labor, self-interest driving from market to economies, and the limits of government intervention. And the theory of moral sentiment published earlier, this work is focused on the ethics and argued that human behavior is also influenced by the impartial spectator and a struggle between passions and reason. The academic career, also became like a professor of logic and then a moral philosophy at the University of Glasgow. In a later life, he became a commissioner in the customs in Edinburgh, where he then died in 1790 here. So, and basically also, yeah, and so he was also known famously for his invisible hand theory, a metaphor for the unseen market forces that guide self-interested individuals to promote the public good. It suggests that in a free market, individuals pursuing their own economic goal, like a baker trying to make profit and intentionally benefit society by creating products that consumers want and need. This happens through the mechanisms of supply and demand and competition that what we need for central planning and government without or for government intervention. So basically, like, how Adam Smith to let like other people, how they take jobs and like basically without any government intervention make a good buying any goods, making consumers as well as also self-interest, creating also many markets and growth of economic growth here, as well as also self-interest is another thing also here, and to like basically increase budget and costs money, as well as also growth of the economy. And also like give one example. Let's give like basically one example. Say if you're like in a shopping market, right here, and you shop like whatever items that you buy here, and you go to the customer, and they basically the customer pays you all the goods they basically, and it gives you like basically the total sum here and of like all the items that you purchased there, and then you have to basically pay them back here, and then eventually after you pay, they basically give you the money back here. That is just basically the types of forms of examples of the forms of capitalism. And so yeah, and I also have videos of Adam Smith here and his invisible hand theory, and also with him between him and Karl Marx, the ideologies, the competition between capitalism and communism here. So if you guys want to see me react to these videos, just let me know in the comments section below, and I can react to them. So let's keep going. All right. Now the next philosopher, we have to go back to some political philosophy. We have Jean-Jacques Rousseau here. So his work and who you guys don't know, he was also like Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He was born in like basically in Geneva back in 1712 here, where his family was father and then family then later moved and like basically didn't have a good childhood back then. But then he later on moved into to France here, and then like in his later life here, and he basically also experienced like the extravagancy and also like the wildlife of people of the luxurious life in France here, which Jean-Jacques Rousseau had basically And with later works, he basically banned all the like basically luxury goods here, and and his also work on like he was also known as political philosophy on his social contract, which he questioned the purpose and the place of the government and its responsibility for citizens. Rousseau claimed that everyone is free and equal, but societies impose that the sense of our ownership over resources of the divisions of labor, which are caused by conflict and social injustice. And his social contract basically states that the people are the sovereign. The people can decide to like run their society through general assemblies and like voting and know how to like run their own government and how people have full control of their state and society here. And also that Jean-Jacques Rousseau believes also like basically that born babies like many little children are basically meant to be born good here, but he believes also that they should need to provide like an education as well. And also that he basically says that that also like what I said before about the banned luxury goods here that he didn't like very much here because of form of capitalism, and that he was a more fake fan of ancient Sparta as more the basic back of people back into like the Middle Ages, basically kind of what it is here. And and yeah, so like Rousseau was also like one of also like the another founders who also influenced also Thomas Jefferson's and like the founders over the Declaration of Independence in during the American Revolutionary War here. So yeah, and also that about people the right to being free here, and even though the labor and all that kind of stuff here is what it is explained here. And I also have two videos, and if you want to check them out, I'll put them in the link in the description below here. All right, so let's keep going. And then we have Voltaire, and also like Rousseau and Voltaire, and I've covered also these philosophers too in the as well as also in the history of like the Age of Enlightenment, as well as also the other video which is talks about the as well as the scientific revolution. So if you guys have not seen that video, be sure to check that out. I'll just give a script above below. But basically, for let's go to Voltaire. So Voltaire, he was born in 1694, and later his work, he was known for like attacking the Catholic Church and advocated for the freedom of religion, freedom of expression, and the separation of church and state, which is the other idea also that was influenced to Thomas Jefferson's like Declaration of Independence here, and which are the church and free state here, freedom of religion, and as well as freedom of speech here, as well as also later on in the Second Amendment in the U.S. Constitution, the right to like basically bear arms here. And Voltaire believed that all the efficiency of reason, he believed that the special progress would be achieved through reason, and that no authority and also no government authority. He was heavily influenced of ideas of freedom of speech and religion and most other Western democracies today, like freedom of expression, as well as also freedom of like speech, and as well as also the right to bear arms, and also all that kind of stuff here, and separation church and state that we mentioned. And also Voltaire is the advocacy of the freedom of speech, religious tolerance, and the separation of church and state, and his sharp wit of the influential works of the French Enlightenment. He is used as the writing, including the satirical novella The Candidate here, which is to critique injustice, corruption, and the superstition here. And it was also later also known into his work in this video here, knowing how to cultivate like basically your own green gardens here. And if you guys want to see me watching these videos, let me know, and yeah, I'll get to them. All right, so let's keep going. All right, next philosopher we have Denis Diderot here. So it's born from 1713. Diderot was later explored all human knowledge and provided readers to a deep analysis of nearly all aspects of human existence, creating a new compendium of knowledge which he presented the provocation of his ideas and philosophy, the arts, and science. The laws that is based on upon natural rights and made for all and not for one in 1755. He was the co-founder and chief editor and the conductor to the Encyclopedia, And so Denis Detroit was best known as the co-founder of Chief Wikipedia, and he was the reason for the directory of the science, arts, and the trades, and the monumental 18th century work that aimed at collecting and disseminating knowledge. His role as an editor pivotal in challenging the traditional authority and promoting Enlightenment ideas for reason, critical thinking, traditional freedom like freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and kind of like the similarities also to philosophers like Voltaire. And it, this influential publication here, like freedom of tolerance, freedom of speech, freedom of action, and as well as also and freedom of character, basically here. Let's keep going here. Next philosopher we have is Montesquieu here, from born from 1689. He was best known for like writing his work called The Spirit of Law, published in 1748, when it is one of his great works of the history of the political theory and of the jurisprudence. He is the principal source of the theory of separation of powers, which he has implemented in many constitutions throughout the world here. Liberty is the right, like including also later in the U.S. Constitution here. Liberty is when the right thing to do everything that the laws permit. Believe that the natural rights inform the evolution of law. Montesquieu wrote that the French society is divided into trias politica, the monarchy, the aristocracy, and the commons. And he stated that the two types of government existed, that the sovereign and the administrative. He also believed that the administrative powers are divided in the executive, judicial, and the legislative. And these are like, all the parts here that were later also added into the US government here. Like the executive, like, you have the president and like the vice president and the cabinet. And then you also have the judicial branch, as well as like the Supreme Court and the other federal courts. And then you have the legislative branch here. This is like basically for US, like you have Congress, as well as also like the US Senate, and as well as the House of Representatives there. So, and we also like, and also these types of things, as well as also like back in the French aristocracy in comparison here, how like, in the French king has like basically way too much power and like way too money, basically too rich, and basically parties and whatnot, and as well as also the little pay its taxes from like many of the poor people in the French, from the commoners here, and yeah, and this will also later, these ideas here will later spread also into the ideas later into the French Revolution later on here, which I did a video on before here in the first video when I started this channel. All right, so now let's go to the next Prussian philosopher named Immanuel Kant here. So, I mentioned about him in like basically my history of Prussia video, as well as the German philosopher Hegel, who I'm gonna get to later here. But let's go over Kant first here. So Immanuel Kant was a prominent figure of the Enlightenment era, known for his contributions to epistemology, the theory of knowledge, and also his ethics and aesthetics. He is best known for his critique of pure reason and the categorical imperative as a key concept of his moral philosophy. The German philosopher is one of the formal thinkers of the Enlightenment, and his comprehensive systematic works in epistemology, ethics, and aesthetics greatly influenced all subsequent philosophy, and especially the various schools in Kantianism and idealism here. So let's go over his Kant's philosophy here. So like basically Kant's ethics here is like basically is a deontological ethical theory developed by Immanuel Kant, with that he bases of morality on duty and universal moral laws, primarily through the categorical imperative. If you guys don't know like basically what the categorical imperative basically means, it basically means like basically the right, basically it's something that you must always do here, no matter like basically what the situation really is here. And whereas the hypothetical imperative basically means something that you always must do, like always has to go time on work, for example here. And so his like basically primary and the means of actions are judged by the intent behind them, not by the consequences. The core principles are the moral rules that are universally applicable. And if everyone did it, then it would make sense. Then it would still make sense that the individuals must be treated as its ends themselves. not as a mere means to an end. So basically, like for Kant, he basically says like basically our moral actions derive from basically from duty and like basically, and that also like another point out that we should also basically not tell out the lie here are our moral actions and basically are no matter what the consequences and what situation you basically made. That's kind of like basically what it means here. However, also later like the axe murderer lying scenario here kind of like basically puts a little bit of strain on that theory because to me like others like utilitarianism kind of makes a little more sense here a bit. So and also like he was also known for basically best known for his transcendental idealism here, so going back from like George like Berkeley's idealism here where he basically states that all our ideas are basically in the mind here, we have basically really access to it here. Whereas Kant believed that it is the idea where space and time and thoughts were ideas in our minds and other worlds, a philosophical system that he argues that the mind is structures where experience reality here, that space and time are ideas that basically shape through the external world here, and that through this idea here, that what we perceive in the indirect realism is that what Kant had basically know it as the noumena here, and also like his categorical imperative that I mentioned that states that you should act on the maxims that rationally will to become the universal laws here, and you always should treat humanity and as an end and merely ends in as means. So basically that means to treat humans kindly and I bet them nice here. Don't be rude or basically don't be mean here. It's kind of like basically what they're trying to explain here, and also that both the categorical and the hypothetical imperatives should also both become universal laws here. And Kant did not like criticize also on the axe murder scenario, rather that the scenario is used to illustrate the strict application as moral philosophy that holds that one must always tell the truth to even to the axe murderer. And also he was also known that Kant was also known for like his criticism on the ontological theory back when I explained about Rene Descartes in the part one of the greatest philosophers video, where he explains that like basically that existence cannot be like a predicate, pretty much destroys like basically the ontological theory entirely here. So in like other words, we could not like basically prove the exact existence of God, or like of like the creation of him being like the creation of the earth or like the whole universe here. All right, and I have a lot of these videos here by the mostly by the Philosophy Vibe and one by the School of Life. So yeah, I might still react to them in the future videos. So let's keep going. Oh, that was pretty loud. All right, so next philosopher we have Edmund Burke here. So he was born from 1729 to 1797. He was basically being known for the father of the conservatism, who had support from both the American and the opposition of the French Revolution, and his emphasis on the gradual change from radical reform. His key ideas include the respect for tradition, the organic development of society, and the dangers of the abstract political theories. Edmund Burke's philosophy often is considered the foundation of modern conservatism, emphasized cautious and organic change rooted in the tradition and experience rather than the abstract rationalism. He believed that the society is an organic entity, not a social contract, and that it institutes the traditions that embody the accumulated wisdom of generations. Key tenets that include the respecting social hierarchy, supporting institutions like family and religion for stability, and being skeptical of rapid revolutionary reform and his opposition to the French Revolution here. So basically, he basically states that, like, basically through human emotion, experience, tradition, through an experience here, and through, and also like into cautious organic change here, and is mostly decided on the conservatism and like his tradition supporting family and the stability. So, and we also have his theory on the sublime. If you guys want me to see his video on, I can do that as well here. So let's keep going forward. All right, so now let's go to. I thought, like, basically to add the American founding fathers here, Thomas Paine and later Benjamin Franklin, because not only there were they like statesmen, postmen, and as well as like inventors, but they're also philosophers too. So why not cover them also in the video too? So now we have Thomas Paine here, born from back in from England in 1737, where he later moved into the to the American colonies, and he was based known as like an American founding father, inventor, and statesman, and also a political philosopher, known for his writing powerful, influential pamphlets like Common Sense, advocated for American independence, as well as The American Crisis, the rally support of American colonial soldiers for the Revolutionary War, and he's also considered later work of the rights of man and the defense of the French Revolution, and a controversial critique of religion in the Age of Reason. And also, let's go over any of these. So, Thomas Paine's main point of common sense was to argue that American independence from Great Britain. He presented a clear, persuasive case to the colonists in explaining the British rule of the source of the problems, and that the only way to resolve them was to break away from the monarchy and to create their own government based on self-governance and individual rights. And the main point, and so basically, like to basically he was like Thomas Paine was like also targeting mostly against like basically King George the Third here, and like how he basically gave out many taxes to the American colonies, as well as sending in British troops and housing them and so on. And also that why Americans should basically need to break away from like the British crown here, and through optimism and whatnot. And so his main point was that through the American crisis was inspired and motivate Americans to preserve and fight their independence from the British rule, and during the period of moral morale, and written during the difficulty of the early years of the American Revolution. Paine's essay argued that the struggle for freedom was difficult, but ultimately worthwhile to the glorious triumph and waited for those who endured. So basically give the American soldiers to the confidence and determination to fight against the independence for British rule here. And the rights of man, it can refer to the 1791 political pamphlet by Thomas Paine, a defense of the French Revolution, and an argument of natural rights to individuals to overthrow a government that does not protect them. It could be also referred to broadly as a foundational documents like the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen in 1789, as well as outlines the natural and prescriptible rights of men, such as liberty and equality before the law, and the terms encompasses a specific political work of the general principle of the universal rights. And we also have his the Age of Reason also championed the idea that human beings are used to reason to improve their societies and improve themselves, leading to advancements in science, philosophy, and politics. Yeah? So that's basically, yeah, so let's go through. All right. Now next up we have Benjamin Franklin here. So from 1706 to 1790. So Benjamin Franklin's political philosophy, he was fundamentally pragmatic and rooted to the Enlightenment rationalism, such as virtue and the belief that necessity comprise to maintain liberty. He championed on individual rights, particularly freedom of speech and free press, and emphasizing that a stable republic required a virtuous, engaged citizenry. The pragmatism comprised Franklin believed that the practical solutions was over rigid ideology, famously accepting the U.S. Constitution with all its faults because he believed that it would be as well administrated, and also that he explained also why we should have he was also known for like working with Thomas Jefferson and John Adams on the Declaration of Independence, and later also like in the U.S. Constitution. He later also explains why we should add also like to add all the branches of government here, like the judicial, as well as also the executive and the judicial branches, legislative, and so on. And his civic virtue and republicanism, he believed that success is a republic demanded on the character of its people, and active, selfless public service and summarized by his warning that a nation is a republic, that if you can keep it. And the fundamental freedoms is to advocate for freedom of speech, assembly, press, and the essential defense against tyranny, and also an early proponent of the American unity, that he developed the Albany Plan of Union in 1754 to create a structured, collaborative government. And also to the evolution of human rights. While initially a slaveholder, Franklin evolved to become a Stomach abolitionist in his later years, and serving the president of Pennsylvania Society to promote the abolition of slavery here. And also, like, while against like many slaves here, slavery in his life, unlike the men like Thomas Jefferson or George Washington here, and later that slavery would later be abolished here later on after the after like the American Civil War here in when it ended in 1865, that later passed through both 13th, 14th, and the 15th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution. All right, now let's keep going. All right, next up we have William Paley here. So William Paley, he was the best known for like his watchmaker analogy. The watchmaker analogy, which was proposed by William Paley, which he explained in 1802, that he argues that the 18th century, that complexity and the purpose of the universe implied that the intelligent designer, as just the findings of a watch that in a field implies a watchmaker to do its intricate working parts, the complex and orderly design of the nature and necessity of a creator, which is God. So basically, the story also kind of like basically goes here that William Paley himself was basically taking a walk from outside here, and then he picks up a rock, and then he thinks it, and he basically says, this rock is just comes from nature itself here, and then he continues walking here, and then he basically comes up with like a mysterious watch here. It has like a beautiful and a unique design here, and it's also basically it's gold and it's shiny here, and he basically needs to prove that it has like basically needs to be a creator here, and he believes that creator, basically, the ideas must come from God here, which is the idea from the teleological argument. So, to that, you guys don't know what that means. Like, basically, that like it basically means that if the God, like since the God created the universe, the Earth, like basically, and natures of life here need to be created through emotion here, like plants that need to be needs a designer here, which basically that would basically needs to come from God here. And to my opinion, no, that's that kind of news. Because I mean, plants need to plant from their own here because they have like basically produce like basically fruit and sunlight and water, as well as going through also photosynthesis as well here. And also that he argued that the intricate of the William Paley, he intricate the design, the purposely complexity of the universe as a watch's mechanism and necessities of the intelligent designer, which is God, because such complexity couldn't be arise by chance. Just defining the watch implies as a watchmaker, opposite the universe order, the function implies the divine creator as far more powerful and intelligent being than a human. The teleological argument possesses that the order, complexity, and the purpose of preserve the universe indicate the intelligent designer, God, rather than a random chance. Alright, so now let's keep going. Alright, next up we have Jeremy Bentham, born on February 15th, 1748 in Housestead, London in the UK. So, Bentham is like basically known for like his theory known as utilitarianism. That I mentioned basically the right action, which would later be done by the greatest good for the greatest number here, which means that the right action could, yeah, and so summarized as the greatest happiness over the greatest number. He proposed that the felicitated calculus quantity of pleasure and pain, and density, duration, certainty, etc., for objective decisions such as design the position, the prison of the surveillance, aiming for the societal good through rational pleasure, maximizing policy and the law of government. So basically all of these here, so like intensity, how strong is pleasure and pain, the duration, how long does it last, and certainly how likely is it to occur, and the propinquity, how soon will it cover, and the fecundity, will it lead to more pleasure, and the purity, will it lead to free, is it free from pain, and the extent, how many people are affected. So basically, that's kind of like if you guys have any other thoughts or ideas about it, please let me show your ideas in the comment section down below here. But there's also kind of like problems. There's also like human utilitarianism as well as utilitarianism, and like John Stuart Mill who explains this, which I'll get to later here. All right.
This video.
It's good going. All right, so next up we have Mary Wollstonecraft here. So born in 1759. Mary Wollstonecraft was an English writer, philosopher, and an advocate for women's rights, particularly in the renown from her 1792 work, A Vindication of the Rights of Women. So, in this book, she argued that the women are not naturally inferior to men, but appear to be due to the lack of education. She is considered the founding figure of modern feminism because of her arguments that equal education and rational thought for women, which inspired later generations of equal rights advocates. So basically, like, this can later influence the ideas such as like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Canton Stanton and others who were basically advocated for the rights of women here, and like basically because during back in the industrial revolution, many women were like basically household or maids here who would take care of their house and their homes and like their children, while men had to basically work in the factories here. But this later gets into later strikes and later protests here, and the women to like basically also have the right to basically freedom to like basically to vote here, as well as also to work in later businesses and later jobs, as well as equal to as well to men. And so, this was also later brought up to the ideas also later that was not basically the women were not right to vote in countries like in the U.S., for example, here until later after in like until later on in like 1920 here after World War One here, that was later President after President Woodrow Wilson the passed by law here that basically got that women were eventually given the right to to vote here. And the vindication of the rights of women, her most famous work, it argues for women's perceived infuriating stem to lack of education, not inherent capacity, and advocated for the conduction and civic rights. All right, so let's keep going. All right, next we have the German philosopher Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. So Hegel was he's born in like Stuttgart in 1770. Hegel was like basically known for like and being adventurous as well as conventional and proud of it here. And he was basically studied on the academic tree, and that's the topmost branch. And he also studied into the university in Berlin in 1830, when he was 64 years old. He died in the following year on November 14th of 1831 here. Um, so Hegel was like basically known for like his famous works such as The Phenomenology of the Spirit here, The Science of Logic, and Ethics of the Philosophy of Human Right. But Hegel's work is like basically famous, but it also tends to be a lot more complicated and at times a lot more confusing here. But he was known for this systematic and comprehensive approach to philosophy, particularly his dialectical method and focus on history and the development of ideas here. He developed his comprehensive philosophical system that addresses logic, nature, and the spirit, and the particular emphasis on the historical and the social aspects of human existence here. So basically, and Hegel's Phenomenology of the Spirit has been one of the most important works of philosophy since the 19th century, and as the question energy has been crucial life in the 21st century here. And so, like, basically, here's some of the ideas, like, basically, the most ideas to rescue ideas from, like, basically from the past and through, like, the perspectives, also through history and through control of the mind here, and as well as also, that he Hegel had also like basically explained also that the basically human progress can go up, and but it also can sometimes get into a little bit of a slump as well here, and human progress cannot be sometimes more efficient here. And so and Hegel also basically rejected also one ideas of also from also like arts, like for art's sake here, like painting, music, news, and traditions here all have like basic knowledge to do, that we need to use all these ideas through the human aspect and through the natures of life here. And also Hegel also supported like the ideas of also institutions, so like and buildings and corporations, such as like you have consumer health education, as well as also medical insurance and about jobs and businesses and the employees and business advisors and so on here. And Hegel is also known for his dialect, which is a philosophical progress of the development through a three-stage cycle: a thesis, an antithesis, and the synthesis, which basically the synthesis provokes the contradictory concept of the synthesis and finally resolves to the tensions to a higher and a more comprehensive understanding known as a synthesis. The synthesis becomes the new thesis of creating the continuing cycle of developing across the areas like history, logic, and consciousness there. And so Hegel, like, like basically, the thesis, like basically, would then like where it becomes like a new antithesis, and but there's sometimes exaggerations and distortions of the whole, and need to clash and like basically talk through like a conversation through back and forward until it would later resolves into a synthesis. However, this would also mean that it would become a new thesis, and then it would repeats itself, and so on, so on, so on. And so Hegel's also was known for his creation of absolute idealism, because he also criticized also on Immanuel Kant's transcendental idealism, mainly because he had questions and skepticism also about how to reach the ideas from like the noumena here. And he created, so instead he created like his own, which is became known as absolute idealism here, which he basically explains pondered through concepts such as cultures, traditions, and society. And he said that these ideas are not external objects, nor are they like, subjective ideas. They are more like shared ideas, and that they belong to everyone in a community, which developed a shared spirit that basically spreads all across space and time. And that this spirit basically tries to reach the absolute here, that how people's cultures change, people change, how aspects of life change, and as well as also um how like basically to reject like basically, and how like basically the mind, the consciousness, how we perceive into this kind of reality exactly, and to the spirit, and to the inductive increases through our inductive reasoning here. So yeah, so now let's keep going here. All right, so now to another German 19th century philosopher. We have Arthur Schopenhauer. So, Schopenhauer is known as the philosopher of pessimism. He is beneath known as like dominated by a blind, irrational, and an unstable that causes human suffering. His major work as the world as to will and representation. He argued that the phenomenal world is a merely manifestation of his underlying will, and he is one of the first Western philosophers that irrigated the Eastern philosophical ideas, such as those of like being a fan. Also, like he was also known for being fans also with Buddhism as well. Here to those of the Upanishads with his system. Schopenhauer's work was significantly influenced later philosophers like Nietzsche, psychologists like Freud, and to many artists and writers. And also like his philosophy, also pessimism. If you guys don't know like basically what pessimism basically means, it basically means like more sadness, and like basically you feel down, and like basically there's something that you do not want to achieve here. Feels like you're feeling down, more like a failure, or that you're not willing to able to achieve, or the human emotion, and as well as also that you're not being capable of. It's kind of like basically what it means here. And Schopenhauer's view on pessimism is basically kind of like more more explainings about human life and more about driving through personal pain and more about human suffering here. And pessimism and the will, he believed that the world is driven also a fundamental, often unconscious force that was the will to live here, or how he explains in German, the Wille zum Leben is what he explains, which is the constant source of striving and therefore suffering. And for Schopenhauer, happiness is simply a temporary absence of pain and not as a positive state in it itself. Here. All right, let's keep going. All right, so next we have the English philosopher John Stuart Mill, who is a philosopher, but he's also an economist and a politician, known for developing as well as also utilitarianism, like Jeremy Bentham, and championing also on liberalism. He defining on the harm principle, like such as the best known for advocating individual liberty against the state control, defining the harm principle, and supporting human women's rights and promoting freedom of speech. And so basically, here's on his works here. So John Stuart Mill's the philosophy centered on utilitarianism and individual liberty. He also argued that the actions, if that's the right to promote happiness, and the wrong if they cause a revere defining happiness and pleasure and absence of pain here. And like basically the government like basically if they act like a tyrant or basically giving the humans harm. That is basically known as the harm principle. So basically, if that basically causes like harm here, then this individual will have the right to have freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, character, as well as protect individual freedom. He championed all the harm principle, stating that and also that society would not interfere with the person's actions unless they cause harm to others, and then the other people can rise and use their speech, activity, and character. And also his utilitarianism explained, written in 1863, advocated his ethical theory that actions are the right if they promote the greatest happiness for the greatest number. And also his objection of women in 1869, which is a landmark for work arguing that the complete gender equality and women's suffrage. And also like raising the rights of women here, kind of like Mary Wollstonecraft, who I've explained from before. And his political reforms as a member of parliament, he also advocated for voting rights, proportional representation, and education reform as well here. Alright, so let's keep going. Alright, so next we have the Danish philosopher, another second of my favorite philosophers, Soren Kierkegaard here. So he born from 1813 to 1855 here. So let's talk about Soren Kierkegaard. So Soren Kierkegaard's philosophy, he was known as for the ground round for like the philosophical new moment known as existentialism, which was why he was given his nickname known as the father of existentialism, centered on the importance of individual freedom, subjectivity, and the provisional responsibility of the world without inherent meaning. And he was also known for like basically there are representation for like basically our own human anxieties as stress, and as well as also like when the world is like basically let us badly down. Here is who he is. And so Soren Kierkegaard, he was born in 1813 in Copenhagen, Denmark. The Danish philosopher and a theologian, he also rejected the Hegelian system, and also basically from like his ideas from those of Georg Hegel, and his perspective he neglect individual, and by emphasizing the subject truth here and the anxiety of choice and the struggle for self-creation. His works would include exploring the stages of existence such as the aesthetic, ethnical, and the religious states, later influence into both 19th and 20th century thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre, Martin Heidegger, Albert Camus, and as well as Friedrich Nietzsche, but as well as Simone de Beauvoir, who I'll also basically give to, and like maybe until so some of these thinkers into like part 3 here, like Albert Camus, Jean-Paul Sartre, and Martin Heidegger. So basically, and Kierkegaard had also basically worked also in the University of Copenhagen, but he also later he also worked into also in theology here. But before he decided that he would move into university here, and when by the time also that when he was at the age of 22, literally like all his siblings and including his mother had all passed away way here, except for only himself and also his brother Peter Christian Kierkegaard, in which then he basically then basically go over his works here, and he wasn't writing for the money. He was only meant to basically save himself, and he thought to all of humanity here. And so by 1837, Soren Kierkegaard was engaged with a girl named Regine Olsen that he broke off with her engagement because of his melancholy and his introspective of Christianity and his vocation as a writer, and were incompatible with the marriage. And also the as well as also in the 1840s, both Soren Kierkegaard as well as also Karl Marx here had basically thought that they would also kind of advocate also into to the also a subject truth here, and as well as through into problems of alienation here. But that's not basically the case here. See, Karl Marx had basically drive on human emotion as well as the process through alienation here. That's through economic stress and workers' unions and strikes, and as well as human emotion. Whereas for Soren Kierkegaard here has more explained about alienation through basically human suffering as well as pain as well as through more anxiety here. And also, he's the subjectivity of truth here. Kierkegaard means does not mean truth is purely relative to the emphasis that meaningful truth requires personal appropriation and commitment. It argues more that the individual truly know a truth that must relate to through their own lived experience, passion, and actions, not just intellectually grasped through the objective fact. And he said that individual create their own subjectivity as truth and prove personal choice and experience. Basically goes from it's more about human faith, inner experience and inner faith and the human experience here. Even when you know that sometimes that basically the whole world basically gets hard, the world's down, and they say when things are basically gets a lot more harder here. And also, basically, Kierkegaard was also known for, his Knight of Faith here, which basically means to have, complete and utter faith in God here, and to embrace the absurd against all logic and reasoning, and you have to keep your own faith. Because before then, Kierkegaard was not only, he was considered himself to be a Christian, however, he did also, basically criticize also, the establishment of the Danish church here, but he teach, his Christian lessons from his father when Kierkegaard was basically a boy here. And basically Kierkegaard also explains that life would it must be moved backwards, but it must be lived basically forwards here. And also what also influenced also the existentialist philosophers was part of Kierkegaard's own work here, known as The Concept of Anxiety, published in 1844, which we basically later sent also into another word known as angst here, which basically are constant angst through motion, human stress and anxiety and pain and suffering here. And now let's keep going. All right, now we have part 2 also with Soren Kierkegaard. So now let's go over his three stages of existence. So Kierkegaard characterized the life of the three spheres, which were not necessarily subsequent but represent different approaches of life. So we have the aesthetic, which is a life that lived in the pursuit of pleasure, sensation, and the enjoyment here. Basically to find excitement is about to find meaning outside of the external world here. And also the ethical stage, which is governed the moral rules and the social duties, often involving a commitment of a purpose beyond oneself. And you have the religious stage here, which is the highest stage, creating the deep personal passionate and also the belief and relationship with God, and as well as even the override of ethical principles. And also we have his individual and choice, which he stressed that the individual is not a product of the universal systems. It is created through the personal choice of the actions here, which is process inherently struggle, often filled with anxiety and despair here, which is on the path to authentic selfhood. And Kierkegaard was also known for basically his on his Works of Love book here, published also in Copenhagen in 1847 here, which Kierkegaard had also basically explained explained that we should also mostly focus on like basically Christian love here, which is basically the idea to like basically love everyone here. And so even though that sometimes love in the marriages, because since the 19th century, we're known as like basically romanticism, but the ideas of like, sense of human love, emotion, as well as also the ideas of literature, as well as art, and as well as music too here. So, and also Kierkegaard's leap of faith here. Kierkegaard was not only like trying to prove like the existence of God here, but he said he would ask us to move us forward into a rational conclusion, a passion, to a leap of faith here, which is basically means the personal commitment to this leap into the act of the existence of God here, which is leap of faith is crucial act that creates individual, is seen as retelling in Abraham's story and is in Kierkegaard's book known as Fear of Trembling here, which is published in 1843, which Kierkegaard basically explains the stories how God had basically ordered Abraham to kill his own son Isaac here. However, Abraham basically refuses to kill his son Isaac here, and God basically disbanded him, but then God eventually goes away, and then basically Abraham then basically goes spend time with his life here and more treats well his son like a son here to basically to Isaac, and also his indirect communication to encourage the individual thought to avoid the pitfalls of the objective systems. Kierkegaard also employed the indirect communication through pastonym of the varied styles of prompt readers to think for themselves and to take the responsibility for their own understanding. All right, so let's keep going forward. All right, so now we have Karl Marx here. So he is the father of communism here. So Karl Marx, born from in Prussia in 1818, Karl Marx's philosophy is known as Marxism, analyzed society through the lens of the class conflict here in the economic systems and his historical change for advocating for a communist society. His likely ideas include the historical materialism, where include the economic base for the shape of the social and political superstructure, and his concept of alienation, where capitalism alienates the workers from their labor and themselves. He argued that the capitalism creates an inherent conflict between the bourgeoisie, the owners, or the proletariat, the workers, and which would inevitably lead to the socialist revolution and the establishment of the classes and the communist society with a common ownership, which means the production here. So basically, Karl Marx was like basically known for like working on the thought for philosophy as well as later working into economics here, and he also was later in philosophy. Speaking of fun fact, though, is that he was basically more influenced by the ideas from Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel here, and was later on to the difference of his life to his later works here. And it was also later Karl Marx was also known for like basically a critique on capitalism, basically criticizing over like through Adam Smith and like later over kind of like David Ricardo also on the capitalism here that like he also argued that for capitalism, he said that dated that workers basically tend for the classes that keep riches keep getting richer here, and that basically people keep getting a lot more poorer and poorer here. And they also advocate also to like basically mass production here as well as factories, and how people need to go to work to keep the economy need to be growing here, as well as also that and also that Karl Marx argued that history is a history of class struggles and the capitalism that conflicts between the bourgeoisie and means so that production and the proletariat and must sell the labor of their wages here, and also that and that many workers also feel with alienation here, as well as also that also the working as well as also that worked for the advocate also for like the poor against like the poor working conditions, as well as also the lower pay costs and lower wages here that also need to be fixed the problem issues. And also under alienation, under capitalism, Marx believed that workers become alienated from their labor because they did not own their products and create their own reduced as single single function. This leads to the loss of creativity and the sense of powerlessness, alienating from their own creative nature from their own others. Karl Marx was like basically also known for like basically also as like he was also like as a publisher as a newspaper, is also publishing news also, and when he moved to America during like also like the American Civil War as well here. That's also another fun fact. And he also moved into Liverpool, into England here, where he met with up with his buddy Friedrich Engels, who I'll get to cover later. It was also worked together with Karl Marx here as critique on capitalism, and later on like basically of lower like low profit working conditions, as well as also minimum cost working hours and a little minimum wage. And so his Revolution and Communism, Marx predicted that the internal contradictions of capitalism would lead to the collapse and the proletarian revolution. This worked would overthrow the ruling class and lead to the new system, which means production would owned collectively by the community, and creating classes in stateless communist society. And also his earlier works, such as the Communist Manifesto in 1848, the co-author with Friedrich Engels, and the outlines of the theory of the class struggle and to the class of workers' reputation. And 1848 is also like basically the known like basic revolutions that swept across Europe here, that advocated for also for like workers' rights, human rights, as well as also working lower social structure, lowering the lower class system, and as well as creating also barriers, as well as also more economic and as well as a lot of political reforms here. And also his theory on Das Kapital in 1867, which is a multi-volume work on the political economy. It provides a detailed critique of the capitalism and its near inner workings. If you guys want to learn more about Karl Marx here and it's about Communist Manifesto here, and there's also a link here. I'll put a link in the description down below. There's different versions you can put into, like the English or German, French, or Russian perspectives of the Communist Manifesto. So if you guys want to check that out here, I do check out this link here, and I also have videos as well for these other philosophers. So yeah. Anyways, let's continue moving forward. All right. Next up, we have Friedrich Engels here, the co-founder also with Marxism. He is a philosopher and a revolutionary theorist that is famous for collaborating with Karl Marx on the Communist Manifesto and documented the industrial exploitation of the condition of the working class in England. He provided a crucial financial and intellectual support to Marx, and he edited the volumes of Das Kapital and developed the key concepts of communism, like the dialectical materialism influenced social movements worldwide. And also that, Friedrich Engels was also known for like basically his working on the factories and working production, as well as in mid cities during the Industrial Revolution in England, such as cities such as Manchester. And there's also Friedrich Engels' philosophy central to Marxism is divided by the dialectical materialism, viewing into history and that nature as endless processes in the change of driven in material economic conditions, critiquing on capitalism and advocating the proletarian revolution and achieve communism, emphasizing on class struggle and the abolishing of the private property, and as well as an agency of the working class, all developed closely with Karl Marx. All right, and yeah, so let's keep going forward. Alright, so next we have Henry David Thoreau here. He's not only like basically a philosopher here, but he's also like basically a writer and a naturalist as well here. So basically Henry David Thoreau here, born in Concord and back in 1817 in the USA. Henry David Thoreau is best known for his book with Walden, A Reflection of Simple Living in Nature, and and also his essay on civil disobedience, like the human right to self-advocate, human assembly, freedom of speech, and right to their voice here, which was later influenced later into the ideas later on, such as men like Gandhi in the independence in India in 1947, and later with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in his civil disobedience and nonviolent resistance movements in the civil rights movement in America in the 1960s, and which advocates for resistance such as unjust laws, and so he he was a leading also transcendentalist philosopher known for a deep of connection with the nature as well as environmentalism and advocacy with an individual integrity, simple living, and social injustice. And his philosophy required that he dedicate the aperture between the wilderness, and he based so much of and the spreading of mass of humanity in North America here. So basically, that he also Henry David Thoreau here basically tells us that we should basically live more into nature, life, animals, breeding trees, and birds here to look more into to basically feel better, comfortable life here, and as well as injustice and like right to freedoms here. But he's also like basically yeah, and so yeah, and also like basically into the wildness and nature, and also like advocated also civil rights and disobedience there. Yeah, so let's continue going. All right. Next up, we have Ralph Waldo Emerson here. So he's also like basically, he's not only like basically, a also like he's not only a philosopher, but he's also like a writer and essentially an naturalist. And so, and as well as a writer. So Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was born from 1803 till 1882, he was a famous as a leader of the 19th century New England transcendentalism movement and the champion of individualism. He is best known for promoting his self-reliance, nature, and nonconformity, such as Self-Reliance, published in 1841, and Nature in 1836, advocating for the individual's trust for their own intuition and these over social conventions. The American Scholar from 1837 is a famous address, often called the America's Intellectual Declaration of Independence, encouraging the American thinkers to create their own traditions rather than imitating in Europe. And he was also for the philosopher and individualism. He believed that the individual is of the private man, advocating for the trusting one's intuition of one's and living life according to one's own values. All right, and now let's keep going. All right, next up, philosopher, we have Friedrich Nietzsche here. All right, so now Friedrich Nietzsche, he was born in Germany, in East Germany in 1844 here, and he later worked into like basically into the university. He did exceptionally well in school here, and he was also worked in the University of Leipzig, and as well as also become a professor in the University of Basel here. Before he was then later exiled and went through also into moving into around the Swiss Alps here. So Friedrich Nietzsche was a German philosopher who was a classical philologist and a critic whose background was marked by the early death of his Lutheran patron and father, and a subsequent upbringing in a household of women, and his abdicated career of his brilliant leading on to become a professor at the University of Basel just at 24 years old. After resigning from his academic post due to his health issues, he worked in his influential work to suffer mental breakdowns in 1889, and is indicated for the lasted 11 years on his life here. And so let's talk about also Nietzsche's philosophy here. So his philosophy is basically surrounding that since ever into the Roman Empire here, Europe has basically come like basically more as a Christian nation here. But since like later on into the 19th century here, many people who were more in the world's more industrializing, working in factories and so on, many people will then like lose over their Christian faith here. And basically also that this was also where Nietzsche basically extends also over into his views of nihilism here, which basically means that life is worthless. There is no inherent value of meaning into life, and the warnings of nihilism, and that Nietzsche proclaimed that God is dead here, which in his book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche basically says that God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. How should we basically comfort ourselves here? The murderers to all murderers. And what he means by this is that he doesn't mean that God is actually dead here. It basically actually means that like basically a lot of people are losing like basically of their like Christian faiths here as well here. So And it's also his wealth and writing plagued by the human health problems. He resigned from also his professionalship in 1879. He then also dedicated himself to writing his most famous works, such as Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Beyond Good and Evil, The Antichrist, and as well as also his other works, The Gay Science, and The Birth of Tragedy as well here. And also, as well as also, so his will to power, Nietzsche believed that the fundamental driving force in all living things is the will to power, which is not only dominating others about self, mastery, growth, and the contagious striving of one's over improvement here. And also with also nihilism, Nietzsche also believed that also to the Übermensch, which is means the Superman, or otherwise some people might call it as the Overman here, which basically means that the idea of human who overcomes the limitations and conventional morality creates their own values, which it states of self-coming and becoming who is truly by embracing life's challenges, and also to help you become strong and into and be in human powers and all of that here. And yeah, and so like, and it was also known for like his master and the slave morality here. So basically, you have the master morality, which is like the almighty, powerful, and the capable here, and then you have slave morality, which is basically who are not masters here, and there are basically the poor, weaker, and the slaves, and or like basically the herd, as Nietzsche calls them here, and like basically they give orders and do what is right to basically to do with their masters is basically what it explains here. But the thing is, there's also like sometimes masters who creates or become slaves as well. I think like that life can sometimes is different than just like the both sides here. People can be sometimes a lot more complicated than just masters and slaves here. But there is some like truth to it here, but not like the full picture exactly here. And also that Nietzsche was also known for like basically his amor fati here, which basically means love of fate here, which is the concept of like involves accepting the affirming all aspects of life, basically of like basically what you are loved, what you are basically desire to do here, what your like basically positive like hobbies are here, and until like it includes into later leads to parts of the combination also with human suffering as well as the necessary parts of one's existence. And then also, his eternal recurrence is the idea that one should live their life if they would have to relive on the infinite number of times. This encourages courageous living of the way that would be internally desirable here. And so, also one another final fun facts was also with Friedrich Nietzsche here. He also was like known. He was also like met up with also with like also later on with another 19th century German composer named Richard Wagner, who was basically Friedrich Nietzsche was like basically a really good big fan of, really here. He became also really good and close friends with Richard Wagner, but however, Friedrich Nietzsche did not like also like Wagner's views of like basically of anti-Semitism here, as well as also his views against like his also against like views against like his against Jews here, and and as well as also like basically that, but he was later on he was also invited also to one of Wagner's also into many of his plays by the late in the late 1880s here, with also alongside with like Troyansky as well as Leo Tolstoy too, and who was invited to Richard Wagner's composing, and as well as also the big theater as well here. And also Friedrich Nietzsche, after like he passed away here in 1900 here, Friedrich Nietzsche's sister later collaborated all of his work here and made it all basically work that was later contributed to later into Nazi Germany here and later into the Nazi Party here. Even though that Friedrich Nietzsche basically then opposed and like basically rejected, and it was against like basically Nazism and also ideas from like the ideas from like the extreme German nationalism as well here. So yeah, and I think this is basically it, guys. So I'm think this is basically a really good place to stop now here. So yeah, I'm basically kind of almost done here to all the philosophers here. Yeah, so this is it. There you guys go. This is a part two of like all history's greatest philosophers here. So yeah, um, so, what do you guys think of this video? Do you like it? And let me know in the comments section down below who your favorite philosopher is here, and also which of these philosophers of their different philosophical thoughts or ideas would you find it very interesting, and why here? And there's also like what, and if you think I'm missing also any other philosophers or so here or anything like that, please let me know your ideas or thoughts in the comments section down below here. But yeah, this is a great place to stop here. If you guys want to see me do more history or more like, history, philosophy, or more philosophy content like this here, then what are you waiting for? Please be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to my channel if you're new. Don't forget to comment and turn on the bell notifications. That way you get notified by every video that I'll be posting in this channel. And yeah, that's pretty much it. There's not much else to say. So yeah, I'll see you guys in my future video. Anyways, Mr. Aaron's out. Peace.